Hello and welcome to our presentation, Enhancing Discoverability of OER, Promoting Collaborative Repository Workflows. Here's a brief outline of our presentation. We'll start with the history of OER at the University of Houston, then discuss the objectives and overview of our workflow for depositing OER into our institutional repository, then best practices for depositing OER, challenges of ownership and maintenance, and future approaches. So starting with the history of OER at the University of Houston. At UH Libraries, we have an Open Education Services Department consisting of myself and Kate, which supports the use of open educational resources and practices, including the adoption, creation, and publishing of OER and open pedagogy. Though the OER program at the University of Houston was first launched in 2018. And later in that same year, we began using Pressbooks as a publishing platform for OER in response to faculty interest in creating new and customized material for their courses. And we now have 24 published items in our Pressbooks catalog. Though when we began using Pressbooks, the OER that faculty created was only available directly on our Pressbooks network in our Pressbooks catalog, so it was limited in its broader discoverability. In 2020, we decided to deposit faculty-created OER into our institutional repository. This would allow OER to be more discoverable through the institutional repository and by being included in our library catalog. We set up an open course materials community and invited faculty OER creators to have their material included. Though beyond that initial push, depositing OER to the institutional repository did not become a regular part of our OER services. In 2022, we revisited the process of depositing OER into the institutional repository so that this process could be reestablished, improved, and incorporated into our regular practice. This was around the time that the Open Education Services Department was formed and gained an additional librarian position, and when we gained a metadata services coordinator, a position which had been vacant for some time. So a cross-departmental team worked together to create and document a detailed process for depositing UH faculty-created OER into our institutional repository, which we call our OER and IR workflow. So now we'll go ahead and focus on that workflow. The primary objective of this workflow is to increase the discoverability of open educational resources within the tools and systems available to us. Pressbooks is usually the starting point. We don't require that all of our faculty creators use Pressbooks, but we do strongly encourage it, and many find that Pressbooks has the features and capabilities that they need for creating OER. The institutional repository increases discoverability by the UH community and public users who might not otherwise find the material on Pressbooks or other OER publishing platforms, and it's suitable for archiving and preservation. There are also multiple OER repositories and referatories available, such as OER Commons, the Open Textbook Library, and our statewide repository, OER Texts, where we can deposit material for greater sharing and promotion to those specifically searching for OER. However, this is an area where we've run into some challenges and questions and led us to begin to dive deeper into the idea of collaborative repository workflows. I'll hand it over to Kate to discuss our workflow in more detail.
So, hi everyone. I'll be providing a high-level overview of the workflow. So basically what happens is when a new OER is developed and ready for deposit in our institutional repository, we have some pre-submission steps outlined in our workflow. So first, the OES department conducts a light review of the resource using our quality checklist for creating OER, which includes some specific standards that we would like to see in the resource before we publish it. So specifically relating to open licensing, attributions, and accessibility. Then after those requested corrections are made by the faculty member, we ask the faculty author to contribute some basic metadata about the resource using a metadata template. And this uses a combined schema from the fields that we need to complete in the DSpace to upload the resource to our institutional repository, as well as some additional fields that are specific to Pressbooks, since many of our faculty are creating their resources there. And next, the workflow outlines the submission process, which is entirely owned by OES. So there's some general guidance around file management for our department to help us keep track of our files. And then we have some actual instructions for uploading the items into the institutional repository. And then finally, we have some additional steps for helping to improve discovery and maintain the resources. So for example, we included some instructions for adding a cover image, and then also instructions for how our department would upload any new or updated versions of the OER. Finally, we also have some descriptions of how to upload the resources to those other OER repositories that Ariana mentioned, such as OER Texts, OER Commons, and the Open Textbook Library. Importantly, we don't have any clear indication in our workflow for who owns that specific process for uploading to OER repositories, and it's a little bit vague and not very well fleshed out in this section. And this is because we were a little unsure about the ownership of this process. So for the institutional repository, that's very clear that this is something that the library owns and maintains and has responsibility for. But we were a little bit unsure if the faculty would need to have more direct control to maintain and update their resources in these other locations. So we decided to look to others for examples to see how other institutions would approach this and see if we could identify some best practices. So what have we found in the literature so far? So we considered a variety of different types of scholarship and information when we were doing research for this topic, including peer-reviewed articles, conference presentations, and even some conversations and listservs that addressed the questions that we had. So what we found overall is that a lot of the conversation is around institutional repositories, as opposed to OER repositories and referatories. In particular, several articles we identified honed in on the use of institutional repositories specifically for preservation, whereas OER repositories were primarily meant to share materials with learners and adopters. Metadata schema is another really important part of this topic, and from what we found, there's not really established standards or best practices for OER metadata, but some folks have discussed their approaches to this. So for example, Burnett et al. Specifically addressed the process of developing metadata schema for their IR that aligned with the OER Commons schema. However, they didn't really address depositing their materials in both of those places in that article. It was really focused on their IR. And a discussion thread from the Spark OE forum in 2020 started with a question about metadata standards for OER, and Amy Hofer from Open Oregon indicated that they were aligning with the OER Commons metadata schema, using their fields and adopting their controlled vocabularies to help make their OER more easily harvestable. And then another important element that has come up in the literature is the idea of ensuring sustainable promotion and preservation by baking these into the creation process early on in the project development phase. So Dixon et al. Discussed depositing materials as part of ensuring that the resource is promoted and disseminated to users. Hare and Sullivan addressed the need to include archivists and digital preservation librarians in conversations about OER creation at the beginning of the project so that they can help address considerations for metadata format and repository functionality for the resource. They also emphasized the importance of policies that clearly define the roles and responsibilities of both the librarians and the OER creators. So the literature also included a number of specific challenges with regard to archival preservation and sharing of OER. And so I'm going to turn it over to Xiao to explain some of those challenges now.
I'm going to share about the challenges of ownership and maintenance when we're managing the OER records. So why maintaining the record is so difficult? First of all, one major challenge is that faculty or content creator may lack awareness of the repository system available or the importance of versioning. This issue also shown in the previous study done by Ferguson. And second of all, a significant challenge for faculty is motivation and time. When faculty member created high quality OER materials, they may not have the time or technical skills needed to revisit. On the other hand, librarians also faces the difficulty related to versioning and metadata. While we are capable of preserving content effectively, we don't know when the new versions are available or changes being made by the faculty or content creators. So this need a lot of communication in between. And additionally, another challenge is the publishing platform we mentioned before. So although UHIR are excellent for archiving, discoverability, and versioning, they don't fulfill the same usability function that platforms such as Pressbooks or OER Common provide. So these roles are not like mutually exclusive, but they do require effective coordination. As we think about long-term access to OER, so an important question arises: who is responsible for keeping the OER records updated over time? Should this process lead by libraries or should this process lead by faculty? So libraries naturally take the lead on metadata preservation and repository workflow. That's our area of expertise, and it's essential for discoverability and sustainability. However, we lack of the specific knowledge about the content that faculty have or content creator have, but faculty may not aware of the technical process around deposit metadata or licensing, or they may have enough time or resources to manage those components. That's why having librarians step in is really important to keep the OER record sustainable in long run. And also what we found and study done by Mello Civic in 2024 is that neither group can sustain the record alone. Faculty involvement ensure accuracy and relevancy of the content knowledge, while library involvement ensure structure preservation and discoverability. So the real question becomes, how do we design a shared model that works for both roles? Here's the benefits of why we using this collaborative model at UH right now. So first of all, for ongoing accuracy, faculty can stay involved with the content and making updates when needed, while librarians can keep repository records, version histories, and metadata accurate. And secondly, to enhance the discoverability, librarians know how to organize and present content using standards that make it easier to find in the UH libraries catalog. In order to support a long-term sustainability of OER, shared workflow and maintenance tasks between faculty and librarians, making it more easy to manage for everyone else who is involved. Lastly, article like a flat overview emphasized that OER sustainability isn't just about creation, it's about co-managing the life cycle of the resources. So collaboration let us build this workflow that preserve, update, and promote OER over time in ways neither group can manage alone. So now that we look at the challenges and why we take this collaborative model approach at our university, so the question becomes, what does the actual look like in practice at UH today, and what are the approaches for future improvements? So at UH, we've already taken important steps towards a collaborative approach to maintain OER record, although it is still evolving. Like in this current model, once content is created, the OES department will use the quality checklist and metadata guideline to ensure the material meet access, licensing, and descriptive standard before deposit. And this deposit and promotion step, we apply a dual deposit strategy here, having materials accessible in both Pressbooks and UHIR at the same time. Pressbooks remain our primary platform for public-facing access, while UHIR for archiving, discoverability, and versioning in the library catalog. This process and this model will raise the awareness, visibility, and adoption of the OER materials after they've been published or deposited. However, we still need a formal process for updating or redepositing new version after publication. And our goal is to create a stronger model where faculty librarians and OES librarians have more clear ongoing role in this long run. So to wrap up, what we're seeing at UH and across the broader communities is that no single person or department can do this alone. A collaborative model where roles are clearly defined, workflows that are thoughtfully designed through departments, and communication is ongoing. It's essential for sustaining the life cycle and importance and impact of OER. As we continue to refine our approach, we are aiming not just for technical resources of solutions, but also build a culture of shared responsibility where everyone works together to create, share, and maintain open knowledge. Thank you.